Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Rabbi Lustig. I want to welcome you to a wonderful opportunity and evening that we've been afforded by one of America's great authors and great advisors on contemporary life. You'll see it says WHC Rich Gordon, Wave Rich. He's up there in the top. If you have any particular problems or anything, Rich can take care of those things. He is a wizard at all these Zoom sorts of things. We give him lots of practice. We're going to ask that you remain muted during the time until we get to Q&A. We wanted to really have a sense of community, so where people are joining on. There are going to be people, obviously, who are joining us a little bit later because you have to sort of be registered. So if you sent, like I did, an email with just the link to a lot of people, you may want to type to them and say, register real quick, and it'll put them on immediately when they register. So we're sorry for the glitch, but, you know, everything has got high security. So I'm going to begin. Again, I'm Rabbi Lustig from Washington Hebrew Congregation here in the District of Columbia, and I am honored to host one of America's premier writers. Bruce Feiler is one of America's premier writers. I'm going to highlight Bruce here instead of me. There we go. He's one of the most popular voices on contemporary life. He's the author of 6 consecutive New York Times bestseller, the presenter of 2 primetime series on PBS, and the inspiration for the hit drama, Council of Dads on NBC. Bruce's 2 TED Talks have been viewed by more than 2 million times. Employing a firsthand approach to his work, Bruce is known for living the experience. He has given us so many things. He is well known to the clergy for his book, Walking the Bible, for his interfaith work, and for his continually giving us the opportunity to have real-time experiences. Bruce's his new book, Life in the Transition, Mastering Change at Any Age, describes his journey across America, collecting hundreds of life stories, exploring how we can navigate the growing number of life transitions with greater purpose and skill. It just came out on July 14th. It has been a buzz all around. For all of my congregants who I've shared it with, I've gotten tremendous feedback. And Bruce, we want to thank you for this opportunity, but more for the gift of your book and the gift of your writing. We're going to turn it over to you for now.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Bruce, for your vision. Bruce and I met in 2002 when my book on Abraham was coming out. And I had gone to Washington Hebrew to talk about walking the Bible, and we were sitting in your office, Bruce, as you recall. We are sort of that tribe of mid-20th century American Jews named Bruce. And we were bonded by more than that, and you said, you know what, I want to step up and let's use your book on Abraham as a way to convene people of different faiths and have important conversations. And you really stuck your neck out and went to bat and scheduled the first Abraham Summit, as we called it, at Washington Hebrew. It was in the middle, as you may recall, of the Washington Sniper. For those of you in DC, remember that? We still had 600 people who showed up at your institution and began an interfaith conversation that you and I have been involved in one way or another. And so when you called me a month ago and you said, why don't we do this again, I was very touched. And I want to thank you for assembling not all of these people, but particularly the voices we're going to hear from in the course of this evening.
So if you'd like, let me just, before you get started, I'd like to introduce those individuals who are joining us on our faith panel. I'll start with my brother, Imam Magid. Mohamed Magid is known throughout the Washington area, but he's known internationally. He is the Muslim Society's Imam at the Adams Center, which is a over 5,000 family mosque in Sterling, Virginia. He is the chairman of the International Faith Peace Corps and the former president of the Islamic Society of North America. He's also chair of a think tank which focuses on confronting violent extremists throughout the research-driven preventative programs within a religious paradigm. Imam Magid has a long history of commitment to public service through organization. He has done more for the interfaith relations, building bonds. He's one of the founding members of Shoulder to Shoulder, and I've had the real pleasure of working with Imam Magid for almost more than a decade here in Washington, and he is so gifted, and we're so glad that you join us this evening. We also have with us, we're very delighted, one of Imam Magid and my dear associates here in Washington, Bishop Mariann Edgar Budde. Mariann Budde serves as the spiritual leader for 88 Episcopal congregations, 10 Episcopal schools in the District of Columbia, and 4 Maryland counties. She is the first woman elected to this position. She also serves as the chairman and president of the Protestant Episcopal Cathedral Foundation, which oversees the ministries of the Washington National Cathedral and schools. A passionate believer in the gospel. She is an innovator in so many ways and a dear friend and a visionary. She created the campaign at the bringing us all on board and fear over faith in the 2016 elections. She was front and center standing at St. John's Episcopal Church downtown, making sure it was protected and wasn't misused by the powers that be. She was consecrated as the 9th Bishop of Washington in November of 2011. She is a powerhouse, but she is also one of the sweetest, warmest, and best pastors that pastors to all of us. She's the rabbi's rabbi. We're so delighted that she joins us. We will be joined, we hope, to somebody who is committed to us, but is so overcommitted, and that is the Reverend Cornell Brooks, who is a professor of practice of public leadership and social justice at the Harvard Kennedy School. He also serves as the director of the E. William Monroe Trotter Collaborative for Social Justice at the School Center for Public Leadership. He's a visiting scholar at Harvard Divinity School. He was a visiting scholar of ethics and law and justice for Boston University Law. He is a visiting fellow and director of the campaign and advocacy program at the Kennedy School. And he is himself one of the most incredible and powerful pastors you'll ever meet. The man can preach. He is an innovator. He's a past president of the NAACP, and he led the Journey for Justice and foreshadowing, and has been on every major news event dealing with the Black Lives Matters. But he is a teacher for us all. And I'm going to turn this back over to Bruce Feiler, and we hope that Cornell will speak up when he joins us. And thank you, Cornell. And thank you, Bruce.
Oh, and thank you, Bruce. By the way, Rabbi Lustig.
Just so you know, I'm joining you too. Hi, Bruce.
Oh, Imam.
Hi, Johari.
Hey, it seems like we were just together a few minutes ago.
This is Johari Malik, an esteemed Imam and a friend, and we did an event, an interfaith event at lunchtime today, and Johari appears in my documentary on the Hajj on PBS, and it's good to be with you again, my friend. You see, I got the real background here today. In fact, there are people I went to high school with here, and there are people in my book. Just a word about how we're going to do this in the time that we're going to spend together this evening. If you need proof that there is a God, there are at least a half a dozen clergy in this assembly, and I'm going to get the microphone uninterrupted for a few minutes, and that in and of itself is a joy and an honor. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how this whole project came about, what I did and what I learned, and kind of tee up a conversation that we're going to have about how these themes echo in the various faith communities that all of you are in. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then I'm going to hand it back to Bruce. And then what we're going to do is my sort of watchword, as I'll explain later, of interfaith conversations, is I'm going to ask each of you the easiest question I can think of, and then I'm going to ask you the hardest question I can think of, and then we're going to see where the conversation goes from there. So I will start by saying that this project has been a central part of my life for the last 5 years. The way I think of my life now in the context of this is that I had something that I now think of as a linear life. So I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, 5 generations of Jews in the South. I left there and I went to Japan in the mid-1980s. I started writing letters home on the "you're not going to believe what happened to me" variety. And when I got back to Georgia 6 months later, everywhere I went, people said, "I loved your letters." I was like, "Great. Have we met?" And it turned out that my grandmother had Xeroxed them and passed them around, and they went viral in a 1980s sense of the word. And so this inspired me to write a book, and I sold my first book 31 years ago. And in my 20s, I wrote books about Japan and England. I spent a year as a circus clown. In my 30s, I was living in Nashville when I first took my bar mitzvah Bible off my shelf and put it by my bed where it sat untouched for 2 years. And then I went to see an old friend in Jerusalem. And let's see a show of hands. So how many in this call have been to Israel, to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia? I know we have people who go on the Hajj. This is the first day of the Hajj we're in now. And that's where I first had the idea that I would retrace the stories of the Hebrew Bible through the deserts of 3 countries and 5 countries and 3 continents, 5 countries and 4 war zones, and read the stories along the way. That led to Walking the Bible, which led to Abraham, and then what became 5 books about the Middle East and religion, 2 primetime series for PBS. And the way I think about this now is that that was what I now think of as a linear life. I discovered very early on in my life what I wanted to do. I did it for no money for a long time. Then I had some success. I got married and I had children. But then in my 40s, I just got walloped by life, a back-to-back-to-back set of crises. First, as many of you know, and Bruce just alluded to, I was diagnosed with a rare aggressive form of bone cancer in my left leg. At the time, my children were 3, and I asked a group of friends to form a council of dads. Then that was the Great Recession, and my family was hit very hard. And then, and Imam mentioned this at the top of our conversation, my father has Parkinson's. That affects your movement and your mood. And my dad tried to kill himself 6 times in 12 weeks. And in the middle of this, we were dealing with family and we were dealing with medical issues, but I'm the story guy and the meaning guy. And so one Monday morning, on a whim, I sent my dad a question. Tell me about the toys you played with as a child. And he answered that question, though he couldn't move his fingers at the time. He dictated his answer. And then I kept going. Tell me about the house you grew up in. How'd you become an Eagle Scout? How'd you join the Navy? How'd you meet Mom? Until this man who had never written anything longer than a memo backed into writing an autobiography. And it was an incredibly powerful change. And as I told the story to those around me, everybody seemed to have a version of the same story. My wife had a headache and went into the hospital and died. My boss stole money from me. My daughter tried to kill herself. My brother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And what everybody was saying was some version of the same thing, like the life I'm living is not the life I expected. I'm living life out of order. That phrase, out of order, out of order. And so I called my wife and I said, I've got to do something to kind of figure out. No one knows how to tell their story anymore. Like somehow our lives are really throwing us in some way. And so what I did was I created something that I call the Life Story Project. And I spent 2-3 years crisscrossing the country, collecting real stories of real Americans of all ages, all walks of life, all religions, every imaginable thing in all 50 states. And in fact, I have a list here of the kinds of people that I talked to. I talked to a Wall Street bond trader turned romance novelist, a truck driver who became a male nurse, the Army Ranger who discovered Saddam Hussein, a 2-time cancer survivor who climbed Mount Everest, a magazine writer turned mortician, 3 people who went to prison, 4 people who died and came back to life, 5 people who saved their marriages by getting sober, 6 people who survived natural disasters. At the end of this, I had 1,000 hours of interviews, 6,000 pages of transcripts with actual people. And then I did something I've never done, which is that I assembled a team of people and we spent a year coding these stories, combing through them, looking for themes and patterns that could help all of us in times of change. And the big idea that emerged from this, that really I'd like to be the foundation of the conversation that we have tonight, is that linear life that I mentioned before is dead. The idea that we're going to have one job, one home, one spirituality, one sexuality, one source of happiness from assisted living, from adolescence to assisted living, is deader than it's ever been. I mean, just think of the world in which we know here, right, which is religion. Half of Americans, half, will change faith or denomination in the course of their lives. 4 in 10 of us are in an interfaith marriage. We know that we will have 15.2 jobs and 12.7 moves and a whole host of changes that we will go through in our lives. So that the idea of a linear life that we were raised with, those of us in the 20th century, is gone. And it's been replaced by what I call the non-linear life. And the non-linear life involves many, many more changes. I just alluded to some of them in religion and relationships and health. My data show that we all go through one disruptor every 12 to 18 months, 36 in the course of our lives. That's more often than most of us will see a dentist. And most of these, and this could be a move, this could be getting married, this could be becoming an empty nester, it could be changing jobs, it could be moving, it could be changing religions, getting sober. Most of these we get through with relative little unease, if you will, in our lives. But 1 in 10 of those becomes a massive life change. And I call this a lifequake, because these lifequakes are larger on the Richter scale of consequences, and their aftershocks last for years. And then that leads to the last idea here, which is that that the lifequakes lead to life transitions. And life transitions are a skill that we can and must master. And my book, Life is in the Transitions, unveils the first new model for how to navigate life transitions in 50 years. So what I want to do here in just the next few minutes is talk a little bit about how these lifequakes affect us. And what's happening is that I've been working on this book for 5 years, and lo and behold, it arrives at a moment when the entire planet is going through a lifequake at the same time. And that leads to a point that I want to make, is that when we were analyzing these lifequakes, we analyzed them on 2 different matrix, if you will. One is voluntary or involuntary. So 47% of the lifequakes in people's lives are voluntary. So a voluntary lifequake would be moving or changing jobs or changing religions. I talked to lots of people who changed religions. An involuntary lifequake is something that happens to us. We get a diagnosis, we go through a natural disaster, our spouse cheats on us. The other metric that I evaluated them on is personal versus collective. So the largest category was personal involuntary. That's I talked to a 2-time cancer survivor who climbed Mount Everest. I talked to people who lost limbs in war. That's an involuntary lifequake that affects just you. A voluntary lifequake that affects you is someone who goes through a job change or who changes religions. I talked to a African-American lawyer in Savannah who was raised Christian and was inspired by the Nation of Islam when he was in college and converted to being a Muslim at that time and has lived a Muslim life ever since. So that's a personal voluntary. And I'm going through into this level of detail because the smallest category was collective involuntary lifequake. So a collective involuntary lifequake would be a tornado. 9/11 came up a lot in a recession. And lo and behold, here we are in a collective involuntary lifequake. And what's, I think, critical about this is that the entire planet, for the first time in a century, is going through the lifequake that we're in right now together. And that is powerful, but it's also deceiving. Because what we know is that even though all of us are going through this together, each of us is going to go through a different transition as a result of it. I actually spent today working on an article that's going to be in Time Magazine this weekend, which I was basically making this point, that even though we're doing it together, each of us will go through a different change. So most of us are lying awake at night, or we're sitting down and having a cup of coffee in the morning, and we're wondering, do I have a job? If I have a job, is it the job I want to have? Do I need to quit my job to care for my children who are at home or I'm an aging parent? Do I want to move? Am I living the life that I want to live? So everybody that's hearing this right now is asking some version of that question. And now that we're 6 months into the pandemic, I think for the first few months we were all in shock and we were trying to mitigate and we kind of held to this idea that we were going to go back to the normal. At this point, nobody believes we're going back to the normal, and we're not going back. We're going to go sideways, forwards, or a different place altogether. And as we reach the 6-month milestone, I think what we're discovering, and the CDC and the WHO have warned about this even in recent days, is that the kind of emotional and mental health impact of the virus may prove to be greater even than the medical and economic one. And so this is the virus is going to be moving from the hospital wards and the unemployment lines to the kitchen tables and to the sleepless bedrooms of people across America. And so I'm not going to go in tonight. We'll see if it comes up in the course of the conversation. I'm eager to get everybody else involved. But I want to say that a couple of things about these transitions. So the life quake that you experience may be voluntary or involuntary, but the life transition that comes out of it must be voluntary. You have to lean in and go through the steps and the tools that I outline in the book in order to get through it. And what happens is when you enter a life transition, that basically one of two things happen. You either get manic and you want to do 14 things at once, or you feel sluggish and stuck in place and you're in a fetal position on the bed and there's nothing you can do. And these transitions feel like you're the only one going through them and that they're going to be very painful. But look at enough of them, as I have done, and certain patterns do appear. And so I want to just put one idea on the table, which is that transitions involve 3 phases. And this is going to come up when we turn to the religious dimension of this, because this is what these phases are involved in pilgrimages and in all the great religious traditions. And these 3 phases are the long goodbye, where you have to confront your emotions and say goodbye to the old you. There's this messy middle, this period of betwixt and between, that in the Abrahamic traditions is the desert period, and in the Hindu traditions is the forest dwelling. You know, Moses goes into the wilderness, and Jesus goes into the wilderness, Mohamed goes into the wilderness. So there's this wilderness period where you shed certain habits and you create new ones. And then there's the new beginning as you unveil your new self. And in my book, I go through each of these and give lots of examples so that people can find inspiration, because I'm not making this up. I'm not wagging my finger and telling you what to do. I'm showing you other people who went through these transitions so you can find things that are relevant to you. So a concluding thought that I want to say is that the heart of this project, that I call the Life Story Project, is the idea that the story that we tell ourselves, that story that's in your head about where you came from and who you are and where you're going. If you got a call right now that you had to rush to the hospital because someone you know and love was in the hospital, that story that's going on in your head about your relationship and when you met that person and what your connection means and where you're going together, that story is the story of your life. And that story is not part of you, it is you in a fundamental way. That life is the story that you tell yourself. And we know, because we model our lives after the fairy tales we learned when we were young, that we want to think of our lives as having a hero and a happy ending. But the truth is that what makes the fairy tale is when the wolf shows up. When there's a wolf or a dragon or an ogre or a tornado or a downsizing or a death or a pandemic, that essence, when the trouble shows up, when it gets difficult, and when we as the hero have to work through it, that's what makes the story powerful. So that we shouldn't turn away when the wolf shows up, because that's when the heroes are made. And the idea that I want to put on the table as we turn, Bruce, to bringing in the others who have been assembled here is that this is an idea that the great scriptural traditions of all faiths, and particularly the Abrahamic faiths that are here, have emphasized and stressed and made central to our identity for, in the case of the Hebrew Bible, 3,000 years, in the case of the New Testament and the Gospels, 2,000 years, and in the case of the Quran, 1,400 years, is that all of our lives, and if you are going to go through these periods, and if you look at what the scripture says, the greatest breakthroughs are when people leave what's comfortable and go into the unknown. When Abraham leaves his family's house and goes to the promised land. When the Israelites leave Egypt and go into the desert. When the Jerusalemites leave Jerusalem and go by the rivers of Babylon and invent Judaism. When Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days. When Paul goes on the road to Damascus. When Mohamed goes back and forth on that journey that is celebrated in the Hajj, when he goes to visit Hagar and when he goes to visit Ishmael. These moments of journeying into the unknown is when the growth happens. And now that we are in one of those moments, I think the challenge is on all of our faith traditions and on each of us to figure out which wilderness we need to go into and how we can traverse it successfully. And I'd like to just end with this idea that the idea of a life transition is a successful idea. These transitions work and they can help us on this journey that we're all on. So with that, I'm going to pause. And I'm going to now go back to what I said I was going to do at the beginning, and we're going to open it up to those who are gathered. And Rabbi Lustig will turn to you. And I'm going to start by asking all four of you. I haven't been able to see if Reverend Brooks has been able to join us. I'm going to start with what I call an easy question, and then I'm going to work my way to a hard question. But I'm going to give each of you an easy question, which is, in the communities that you are in the conversations that you are having, I'm basically generally curious how these ideas resonate and how you feel your communities, the individuals within it, are responding to the life quake that we're all in right now. Bruce, you want to go first? Rabbi Lustig?
I'm still helping Cornell is getting on, so I'm going to turn to Bishop Budde. She's looking, she's saying she'll get me back for this, but go ahead, Bishop.
This is the easiest question, Bishop. I'm still working my way toward the hard one.
I'll give Bishop a second on this since I caught her off guard, and I just want to make one comment because I think one of the things that I found does resonate for so many of all of our congregants, and so much for not only this, but what we do when we pastor and when we are guiding people. The existential questions will ask themselves. And we all know, and I think in many ways, and you allude to it, Bruce, in your book, that Viktor Frankl tells us that we can't change the facts, that, we have to, the circumstances are what they are, but we can choose how we respond. And so I think that what this, similar to your piece, and that the link to faith is about, I see that this is the opportunity for empowering people for self-determination through faith and through other opportunities. I'll turn it over to Bishop Budde now, and there we go.
Well, I can't wait to see what the hard question is, Bruce, but I don't know that there's one response, and I feel that the journey you outlined at the beginning is what our people are experiencing, and that partly there is, in the beginning of if it's either a disruptor or a life quake, there's a looking around to see how much has actually changed and how much I can hang on to. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, weeks and months, all of us were trying to simply hang on to as much as possible and get through it, hoping that it would be a short and relatively, that we'd get through it unscathed and we could go back to what we had known before or had hoped for our future. And then, as you said, what we're experiencing now is that disorientation that comes when we recognize that there is no going back, and we have to lean on the whatever insights or guidance we get from God, often transmitted, as you said, through our sacred stories that give us an assurance that we're not alone, that we are going through something that God is present in, and that we aren't the first. And maybe that's the most important thing to remember. We're not the first of our species to experience this kind of massive disruption. And so to find an anchor, to find solace and some sense of that mysterious combination of agency and also reliance on what we in the Christian tradition would call grace, the unmerited power and spirit of God that carries us through and in fact prepares the way for us as we move into our new future. And so those are some of the things I've been thinking about. And I'll just add one more thing. And I'm channeling now my mentor and brother, John Lewis, who passed this week, that there's there's something about accepting the world as it is while you're fighting to make it better that allows for a kind of purpose, something that you described in your book, that sense of calling in the midst of it, that gives one a sense of purpose in the midst of societal chaos. And I think we're seeing that in so many people whose lives have really asked them to step up in ways that maybe surprised even them, all of us, in terms of what we're capable of when our backs are against the wall. So I'll stop there.
Imam, would you like to give us Bruce has pulled you up. So tell us what you're seeing and feeling and hearing.
Yeah, thank you so much for this beautiful introduction that you just gave us, and you took us in the journey of your book. I really, as I said before everyone joined, I really liked the book, and I do believe that the idea of transformation and change does happen sometimes through events, and we are coping with this reality now in my community by having all the weddings become almost Zoom wedding. Those big wedding that were planned reduced to 3 or 4 or 5 people. Maybe sitting with you and the rest on the screen, or the people who could not attend the funeral of their loved one, especially those who died through COVID-19. Therefore, there's a lot of change have taken place. But I do believe that through this transformation of these events, we have a new reality that I have seen in my community, more resilience. And I can see that people now in this area, a time of universal values, and we have transformed our community from only Adam's community, but the larger community, because we have to think about everyone else in the larger community that who maybe lost their job and maybe going through a difficult time. And I can see that the Christians and Muslims and Jewish been doing a lot of work together. We have established something called My Neighbor Keeper. We've been meeting on Zoom now every other day, almost, from various cities in the United States. But this is a time of test. In the time of test in Islam is a time that where a person get closer to God. And story of Joseph in Holy Quran is very comforting. None of this, his life plan worked out as he wanted to be, but finally he has lived his dream through struggle and a difficult time. And that's what I teach my community. By learning about the stories of prophet and messengers in Islamic history and the Holy Quran, we come to reflect on our own struggle at this time. Therefore, everything you have said resonates very well with me, and I can see that transformation have taken place. And here I'd like just to read the verse of Rumi, what he said: wound is the place where the light enter your body. Mm-hmm. That's change happen through difficult times sometimes.
Before we move on, you mentioned at the outset that this is the Hajj that you go every year, and you had 200 people who were planning to go on the Hajj this year, and you've said you tell us what you've replaced that with?
Yeah, we go every year, but 200 of us from our community. I lead them in Hajj trip. Now I'm meeting with those people online to talk about the lesson to be learned from Hajj, and we're going through the events of Hajj so that they can at least feel sense of connection during this time. And we tell them that from the Islamic perspective, God have written for them pilgrimage because they couldn't do it because of circumstances out of their hand.
We have Cornell has joined us.
Awesome.
And he's up there, and I'll let him catch up. He's been everywhere, and I'm so pleased that he joined us. I'm gonna try to give my little response, and then you can repeat the question a little bit for Cornell. Bruce, I want to remark on the same story that my brother Imam Magid regarded to the story of Joseph, because I think in what resonates for people is the two sides. In the story of Joseph, one of the things that is most frightening and real is Joseph is in the pit and he hears his brothers talking. The imagine of that so many of us go through life where we have things that are going on the inside of us and no one else knows it. And I think what's happening and seeing now is that this opportunity and the fact that we're all going through the same thing collectively and independently is a transformative moment, not only for us religiously, but for us as a society. And in fact, I think our societies will be judged by how well we respond to this. And that's why I think it's so powerful that your book comes out at this time. So for me, I think that you sum this up and it's on, at least in the copy that I have, which is a pre-copy, on page 219, you write the following. Like many aspects of life transitions, the act of shedding is fundamentally an act of adjusting your personal story. It's a narrative event. It involves closing certain chapters in your life story in order to open new ones. That new chapter, as it happens, is built around one of the more exciting things I heard about, a period of breathtaking creativity. And to me, this is the opportunity that religion gives us, this opportunity to take the most tragic moments in our lives and to be able to have reflection on them and to begin again. The righteous man falls down 7 times, is lifted up. We have so many things that allude to this. So I'll let you repeat a little bit of the question so we don't catch Cornell totally off of, but this man can preach his way out of anything.
Well, I'm going to actually sharpen the question for Reverend Brooks. First of all, thank you for joining us. That was beautiful, Bruce, and all three of you. And let me go back to something that Bishop Budde said about the fact that we're not going back. As you know, in the book, I talk about these various phases, and the first phase really is the long goodbye, where you have to confront the fact that you may not be happy that we're not going back. And I was so shocked, but also pleased to discover that people use rituals of their own invention to kind of bury the past. They bury it in the backyard. They hold a memorial service. They jump out of an airplane. They get a tattoo, something to say we're not going back in a kind of big public way. What I want to turn to you, Reverend Brooks, is ask the following question. So there's one of the things that happened as I sat for hour after hour with hundreds of people across this country and said, tell me the story of your life, is that when people started talking about going through difficult times, they said that more than one happened. So that just when they lose their job, they wreck the car, or just when they're going to move, their mother-in-law needs a cataract surgery and their daughter is found to have an anxiety disorder. And I had never read about this in the literature on social change, and so I struggled to name it. And I eventually came to call it a pileup. Thinking about the old black and white cars where the first one stops, and remember that boom, 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 boom. There's like 2-car pileups and 4-car pileups and 10-car pileups. And I bring that up in turning to you, Reverend Brooks, because some of these pileups are accidental or coincidental. But some of them are because our immune system is weakened, and therefore when one thing happens, we initiate a change. And I bring that up for the following reason. We are going through a collective involuntary lifequake, in the language of my book, in the pandemic. And then lo and behold, in the middle of this, 2 or 3 months after it started, we go through what my book would call a collective voluntary lifequake, which is the Black Lives Matter movement, and which is this reckoning of a legacy of social injustice that goes back to the very founding hours of this country. So why is it that the murder of George Floyd is what triggered this? And I believe it's intimately connected to the lifequake that we're going through. And that we were in this moment of change, so let's rush toward more change. So that's a kind of a long and somewhat pointed way of turning to you, Reverend Brooks, and saying, what do you see in your community of how people, and by the way, if you missed my preamble earlier. This is the easier question, and then I'm going to get to a hard question. How are people responding to this collective change that we're going through? What are you seeing and hearing in your community?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just begin with a word of appreciation for being a part of this conversation, and my brother Bruce for bringing me to the table and seeing people whose work and ministry I respect so much, and thank you for your great work. So, thinking about the COVID-19, I should say the convergence of the pandemic of COVID-19 and the pandemic of police brutality in the context of the George Floyd protests, in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, and this pile-on effect that you described, it reminds me of the circumstance of Job, right? So where people feel as though they are at the mercy of powers much greater than themselves, that test their will, that test their capacity to survive. And so we see this not only in terms of the convergence of these pandemics, but with respect to the pandemic of COVID-19 itself. That is to say, people suffer from primary effects, namely infections, namely fatalities, hospitalizations, but secondary effects. Children not being able to go to school, parents having to serve as tutors to their children, those who are as a consequence of rising income inequality, they aren't able to work remotely, work at home. Their children are unable to get on. So there are all these secondary effects that make people feel quite powerless in the hands of circumstances seemingly much greater than themselves. So there's this life quake, if you will, and a life quake, as you describe it, of our making. But the one thing I would note here is, like Job, we are collectively before our God, and we rely on our God. And we demonstrate that as a matter of ritual, as a matter of liturgy, as a matter of service in the context of this vastly and quickly changing times. And so what I see in my community are clergy serving their flocks remotely, trying to establish intimacy and community via Zoom calls. What I see in my community are clergy trying to figure out how do we practice a ministry of presence when people are in hospitals and we can't get to them. How do we deal with these circumstances that seem well beyond our control and give people a sense of moral certitude, a sense of moral security? And it's a moment in which it's not a matter of merely racial reckoning, which has been much described, or a kind of post-third reconstruction, or being on the cusp of a reconstruction, but it's a matter of really, like Job, a religious reckoning, and that is where many of my colleagues are.
Okay, that was beautiful. Thank you for joining and for that. And now I'm going to ask the hard question. And Imam, I'm going to come to you first because of something you said at the outset of our conversation. I can't remember if it was before people joined or some people have joined later, in which you said that you were moved by the story of my father. And as you know, in my book, I begin with the story of my father trying to take his life multiple times. And I will add that his father also had Parkinson's and actually did take his life a month before I graduated from high school. There's someone in this call, herself a distinguished reverend in the American South, Ann Maxwell, who was, I remember seeing, helping me go through that at that time. And then my book ends with my dad sharing the story of his life. And so what I would like to do now, and somebody asked me, I was on NPR over the weekend, and Michelle Martin, also a distinguished citizen of Washington, D.C., asked me, like, why'd you put all your stuff in this book? And I said, well, I put all my stuff in this book because I'm asking other people to put their stuff on the line, and also because we all have stuff. And so the hard question I want to ask you comes out of the number one thing I learned from doing interfaith conversations over the decades, which was a piece of advice given to me when I went in, and it's really held true for me, which is that in these conversations, one should not speak in first person plural, like we Jews or we Christians or we Catholics or we Muslims, that we should all speak in first person singular. So I'd like to ask each of you to get a little bit out of your own comfort zone, perhaps, and step off of the podium down to where those of us in the pews are sitting. And I'd like to ask you how something you've learned in a lifequake that you went through and a difficult time that you had to endure, what lesson have you drawn from your own nonlinear life? If you were looking in the eyes of somebody either joining us tonight or watching when we post this online, what experience from your own life can help someone who right now is struggling, is lying awake at night, is wondering, can they get through this? So give us a personal reflection, if you might. And Imam, I'm picking on you because you mentioned the personal, so it strikes me that it might have struck you. So what's your response to that if I'm asking you to speak to an individual who's in pain right now?
I would like to talk a little bit about my father as well. I came to United States because my father had a kidney failure, and he came to United States for kidney transplant. And I was supposed to be the donor. Unfortunately, at that time, that even if you have the same blood type, you have to have your tissues match. And I couldn't give him the kidney. But my father was the reason that I came to United States. And had an experience of meeting the first time in my life a Jewish person. And that happened to be one of the doctors, Dr. Cohen. I have a Muslim doctor, Dr. Ali, still practicing in medicine, and Dr. Kali and Dr. Cohen. A Muslim, a Christian, and a Jewish, 3 of them taking care of my father. That's my first interfaith experience in action. And I had a great conversation with a Jewish doctor, asking him all kinds of questions. He is the first time in his life met a Muslim clergy. And because my father was this one known scholar in Sudan. And he started asking questions. And they developed friendship, actually. I decided to commit myself to bring people together. And I said to myself, if 3 people, doctors, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, try to heal a man, and all of them care about his life, I think Jewish and Muslims and Christians can work together to try to heal the world. That's my beginnings of my journey of interfaith. But also another transforming moment in my life, when I went to the mosque after 9/11, and I found all of this writing on the wall of Adams Center. At that time, we were renting a place in one of the shopping center. Very hurtful writings telling us to go back home. You don't belong to the United States, and all kind of language being written in our walls. And as the people heard of that, Jewish, Christians, Sikh, Hindu, they showed up in our mosque next day with donation. They've written checks for us to fix the walls. The Jewish community, I will never forget that. It have transformed me and changed me forever. Come with big poster of the children signing a big poster saying that they welcome our children, that are here to show love for our children because of suspending our school. And the Christian community showed up and they said they want to help to repaint the wall. That's very transforming to me, personal level. That when people talk about love thy neighbor, now I've saw it in action. No longer is a lip service. For what am I advise to anyone listening? That relationship matters. You will find those people in the difficult time. We being created as a social being. And I can tell you that when Bruce Lustig gave me one of the biggest hug after we lost one of the dear member of our community. She was killed on one of the Ramadan, 17 years old. It meant a lot to me. He walked in middle of my congregation, and here's a Jewish rabbi give me a hug at the most difficult time. I was mourning a loss of a young lady in my community, and the whole community was in a state of shock. And here, a friend of mine gave me that comfort. Therefore, all of the stories create a lot of memory, man, in me, and you know, I think that have transformed me in many ways. But I tell people, don't give up, and relationship matters.
Bishop Budde, a personal reflection. What would you say to someone who's in pain? A lesson that you've learned in a time of pain, perhaps in your own life.
I feel like I should just create a moment of silence to sit with that extraordinary account. So thank you, Imam. Mine is much less global, but definitive in my life, and particularly poignant because I'm sitting next to my mother,
Oh,
who
wow.
is a big part of this story. When I was 17, I was living with my father and my stepmother, and the world that was my world just fell apart for all sorts of reasons that had to do with the demise of that marriage, bankruptcy, alcoholism, lots of things that were conspiring to dismantle my family. But because I was 17 at the time and had, for the last couple of years, really found my solace and, in fact, my alternative family elsewhere, as adolescents are prone to do, with my community of friends. And because on my own, I had found a spiritual community, happened to be part of a very strict fundamentalist Christian community, but that had nonetheless introduced me to Christ and also shepherded me through through all of that chaos, and had given me a place to stand and a place to be. And because I had a life in my high school, right? The last thing I wanted to do was to leave that world. But I knew, as sure as I knew anything, and it wasn't a knowledge that came to me from the outside, because all of the people in my external world at that time were, in a funny sort of way, dissuading me otherwise. I knew at the core of my being that it was time to return to my mother, whom I had left as part of a fairly nasty custody battle when I was 11. And there was, it was the first time I can consciously remember feeling an inner sense of certainty when the authority figures of my life, and I mean that, I'm using that term both loosely and strongly, were leaning in a different direction. And also my heart would have called me in a different direction. I would have chosen to stay. But the call was to leave and to go back. And I could describe at some length, but I'll just leave with the fact that it was the time that gave me the first conscious assurance of what Reverend Brooks was talking about in terms of standing before God, feeling that I was being guided and protected by, and that there was a reason. And maybe that's the other thing, that I intuitively knew that there were reasons for this that were beyond my understanding at the time. And the number of things that I can point to, including the fact that I'm still a Christian today, which I'm not sure I would have been if I had stayed in that kind of straitjacket of an intellectual and spiritual community. The fact that I found the Episcopal Church, the fact that my mother and I have the relationship that we do, the fact that my life went in the direction that it did, I can trace it all back to that time when at the time it felt like the worst possible thing that was happening to me. And it turned out to be the first, not the last, but the touchstone of what a decisive moment feels like when your life asks of you something that you didn't think you could do, but by the grace of God, you do, and then find yourself carried to places that were waiting for you. Once, like Moses stepping into the Red Sea, once you take the steps to go where you're being led. So, thank you.
That was deeply beautiful. Everybody listening, now you get a sense of what my life has been like the last 3 years, hearing incredible stories like this. I'm so moved, and that was beautiful. And since she mentioned you, and we're going to do this in slightly different order, Reverend Brooks, if you had to look into the eyes of someone now who is suffering and in pain and stepping into that wilderness, stepping into that sea, stepping onto that sand, there's a story that a Pakistani immigrant to this country told me. He came with his parents, young Pakistani immigrants, quite poor, ended up in New York, and the father became a schizophrenic and was ostracized from the community that had welcomed them, and they were homeless for a long time. And this young man had the burden of that family background. Had to go to law school because that's what he had to do, but he wanted to be a scriptwriter, and he moved to Hollywood to try to become a scriptwriter. And he told me this story that I had forgotten, of Indiana Jones trapped across the ravine, needing to walk across a bridge that wasn't there, and he literally had to put his foot down to discover that the bridge that was waiting for him. So Reverend Brooks, what would you say to someone who's setting out on that journey, unsure and unknown, that might draw from your own personal experience?
Sure. Some of the most painful moments of my life have been at the intersection of circumstance and faith. In other words, those points at which you have faith in God, but circumstances literally call into question your faith in God, and perhaps your faith in yourself and your faith in goodness. And in the midst of this moment, with it seems like so many things are falling apart, it's important to remember that God has the ability to not only hold us together within, but to literally bring people into our lives to hold us as He holds us. And that's just been so important for me. And I'll leave with this note, since this is an interfaith gathering. I can remember it being at the NAACP and having some moments of anxiety. Like I just had not experienced receiving death threats on the regular. And I remember one time my board questioning the need for security. And so I, in an effort to persuade them that, we were not being hypervigilant by having the modest security that we had, I asked my colleagues to collect all the hate mail, the digital hate mail, put it in a folder and send it off to the board. And one of the things I noticed in that was the number of times when I was called out of my name, called the N-word, but also called out for opposing anti-Semitism, for opposing Islamophobia. And the fact that struck me was there were very few times when I was cursed out for being Black that I wasn't also cursed out for associating with Jews and Muslims. And so in a perverse sort of way, reading all this stuff reminded me of the things my grandmother taught me as a little boy, that you stand up for those things which are right, and the things that make you afraid should also make you bolder, should also make you more courageous, should cause you to believe in God even more. And last point here, my grandmother literally told me this story when I was a kid. She said, on the day you were born, you weighed 3 pounds and 3 ounces. Born in El Paso, Texas at Fort General William Beaumont Hospital, military installation. And she said to me that when you were born, you came out feet first with the umbilical cord wrapped around your neck. The doctors told your mother that your child is not likely to live beyond the end of the day. So my grandmother, Rosalie Prelo, says, the doctors go to your mother and say, if you're religious, you need to have a chaplain bless your child. So they literally looked for a Protestant minister because we're Methodists, couldn't find one. They then looked for a priest because that would be the closest thing to a minister, couldn't find one. So then they find a rabbi. And my grandmother tells a story that the rabbi baptized me in contravention of whatever rules he was subject to. And because of that, you're here today. My grandmother used to preach to me like all the time, believe in God, have faith in God, be strong, stand up, be fearless, be courageous no matter what. And when I felt afraid, I literally thought back to those kinds of stories. So
I've actually spoken in the only synagogue in El Paso. So that's a great story. I want to note for the record here, by the way, again, back to what my life has been like with the Life Story Project. A quarter of the people that I spoke to had addiction in their lives in some way. And here we are in this conversation where two stories of addiction, not the principal, but in the family. This is a story that we are not talking enough about in this country. We're going to open up to questions after this, but Bruce, give us, if you might, perhaps a lesson from a lifequake in your own life that you might look someone in the eye right now who's going through a difficult time and wondering, are they going to make it through?
I think I'm unmuted now, I hope. I will tell you, I'm going to try to do this in a concise way, but in the Bible, I've always, not then, but now, I've always been imagined that there's always the unnamed person. Joseph in that story wouldn't know where his brothers were going if there wasn't an unnamed individual who pointed the way. And so there are times where there are people that play a pivotal role and they don't even know it. And it used to be Rabbi Kushner wrote a piece, Larry Kushner, not Harold. Larry Kushner wrote that like jigsaw puzzle pieces, we all hold the piece to somebody else's puzzle. And we help complete other people. My situation was one where it's a confluence of a lot of things. In my senior year at high school, my father was in a terrible industrial accident. He was in a coma for almost a year. He worked at Ford Motor Company and had his own business at the same time. And everything just sort of came tumbling down, and it was a very, very difficult time. Miraculously, my mom sat there and they thought my dad was brain damaged and all these things from that. And we weren't sure what was going to happen. And we're talking about, a coma that lasts for, it was just pretty amazing. There were friends of his who came in who said, I need to find something on your dad's desk, who would come in and take my mother's bills and just pay them and not say a word. And, this idea that there's these people that fulfill certain roles at certain times has always amazed me in that sense. And in that period of time as well, my mom was looked up and said, Norman, I don't even know your social security number. She had to fill out some papers. And my dad at that point spit out his social security number. And from that, that was the first time he spoke, and he made a remarkable recovery. I'm a child of a Holocaust survivor. My grandparents were phenomenal influences in my life. My grandmother, my Oma, and my Opa were just really powerful influences that gave me an inner strength. But I always felt I faced anti-Semitism growing up in the South with Bruce. You would know, it was incredibly common. It was an everyday event. But the transformative moment that changed almost everything, I made a decision. I went to Israel, and I had lived on a kibbutz before. I spoke pretty fluent Hebrew. I'd been big on things. I'd managed always to sort of skate myself through. I never really had academic confidence. And one of my teachers noticed something in graduate school, and they actually came in and said, you have a real language deficit. You're making all these type of really strange sort of mistakes. And they looked at my college records, and I had, very good grades and great scores and other things. So they sent me and thought I had a brain tumor. I mean, it was, here I am in Israel in my first year of graduate school and whatever. And They're telling me that nobody can manifest, do this successfully, and have these type of language deficits, because I couldn't tell the difference between all sorts of letter and a 3-root system with no vowels. My language facilities, what it came out is I'd been a dyslexic and never knew it. Had always managed to skate my way through. I got girls I knew to type my papers. I never spelt. I did all sorts of things. I was creative. I was able to always, I was a pretty good orator, all these things. What happened is that there was a man, Edward Siskin. He was a rabbi who had been a very famous rabbi in North Shore Synagogue, who had left the rabbinate and had become a very famous anthropologist who lived in Jerusalem. And may he rest in peace, Michael Klein, who was the dean of the school, brought me in and he said, this is so weird. You're one of the brightest people I know. He had faith in me, and he sent me to see Edward Siskin. And Edward Siskin sat me down, and he's the unnamed man, or who's not a name, but who did something profound. He said, you're going to stay, and I want you to do a second year. I believe in you, because they weren't sure how I was going to get through, because there was a gap between my ability to speak modern Hebrew and to do text work. And in the end, what happened was Siskin paid for me, because Siskin had been a stutterer, and somebody stood up for him. And he ended up being one of the most profound and powerful orators. And so my rabbinate has really been shaped by the fact that because these people extended themselves and changed my life with their generosity and their belief in me, I am the one who makes sure that every child that has a learning disability is able to have a bar bat mitzvah. I'm the one who looks and says that you can't, the test is to get across the room. It's not to do this. I had a professor who looked at me and said, you're gonna become nothing. You're not able to do this stuff. You can't cut the mustard in my class. You shouldn't be a rabbi. I periodically send to him, even though he's retired, I sent him a picture of me with the Pope. I sent him a picture when I was picked as one of the top rabbis in America by then Time Magazine and whatever. So I think the part of this is we all need somebody at some moment to make us believe in ourselves, to point us in that right direction, to push us in this way. And that's why I'm so incredibly moved by your book, because the ABCs that you described, that agency, that belonging, and that cause, we all navigate those things, and it's brilliantly done, Bruce. And I can tell you already, I've given your book to congregants, and there's some on here who in their life moments have been able, you have become that man by giving us this. And I'm so appreciative of it, and I think you're going to hear many, many more stories.
That's beautiful. We're going to open it up for questions. I know people have stuck with us a long time, and not that many people have dropped off. So let's just take a few questions. Stephen Haasen, I'm going to turn to you here in a second. I want to just say that I call this person a magical outsider. There's a story I tell, as you know, Bruce, that I love. Freddie Reese, who was also had a drunk, abusive father, grew up in an ultra-Orthodox community in Los Angeles, moved to Brooklyn, and she was put into the marriage market as a teenager. The first person that she went on a fixed date with, an arranged date with, confessed he used marijuana, and so she spent her one no card. And the second person she went on an arranged date with got into a fist fight on the street, and on all three of their first 3 dates got into a fist fight on the street because she'd used her no card. She married him, and he threatened to kill her on her honeymoon, literally described putting his hands around her neck. And she thought if they moved to New Jersey and had kids, it would get better. It didn't get better. And he was incredibly abusive for over 10 years. And she went to his father, who said, there's nothing wrong with my kid. She went to her mother, who turned her back and walked out of the room. And finally, it was one of these magical outsiders who slipped her the name of a therapist. And when she went to the therapist said, this is domestic abuse. and she ended up being the first person in her community of Lakewood, New Jersey, who to get a restraining order of her husband, ultimately left the husband, enrolled in Rutgers, got a 4.0, was a valedictorian of her class at Rutgers, and became a journalist, and transitioned out and now runs an organization to help children in forced marriages as teenagers get out of those marriages. That's a magical outsider, and that's a beautiful story that you tell. I'm going to call on a couple of people. Stephen, I want to turn to you, and Jahari, if you're still there. This is Stephen Haasen, and I'm actually just not going to tell the story, Stephen, because it's just so unbelievable. But Stephen went through one of the most astonishing life transitions of the hundreds that I heard, and it is the focal point of chapter 12 of my book. And Stephen, as a young man growing up in Queens, essentially met some young Japanese students, co-eds, I think they would have been called at the time.
And students.
They weren't students, right? Anyway, to make a very long story short, Stephen entered in full embrace the Unification Church and rose to become a quite prominent figure and a kind of a trusted confidant of Reverend Moon. And
I love you, Bruce. It's great. I was just an American leader. I was not a confidant, but I believe I was.
Anyway, I won't tell the whole story. It's an amazing story. You had an accident, and then he transferred out. But anyway, you did go through this life story process with me. I know because we've been emailing, and you've been kind to share this story. So give us a question for the group that we have assembled here. What's been your personal reaction, and what would you like to hear us reflect on?
Wow, what a profound opportunity.
And I should say, while you're collecting your thoughts, that Stephen now has for decades helped people transition who get involved in cults or hate groups or some sort of mind changing.
Yeah, the moment with William Barr makes me hold up my last book.
Yes,
because
exactly.
It really is bad news. I know I've just alienated 60 million Americans, but anyway, no. I was rescued by my family and helped other people get out. I guess my question is just how to, as a healer, as a giver to your communities, what you do to restore yourself. I mean, I know them prayer and meditation, but as a healer, as a leader, to stay charged.
Reverend Brooks, I saw you nodding.
It's someone who's put the pedal to the metal more than a few occasions in terms of just trying to do as much as possible, as humanly possible, in circumstances that are quite challenging. One of the things I've found is to come to grips with your own sense of frailty, right? And your own with a sense of moral humility, your own need for community. And so one of the things that's brought me closest to God have been God's children in community who have, put their arms around me in the context of my own frailty, right? So in other words, you can be high achieving, you can do well, you can be a fairly accomplished person, but at the end of the day, you are left with your own humanity, and that is best shaped and supported by other human beings under God's anointing and power and authority. And so the point being is, as a seminary, I was taught to engage in spiritual practices like meditation, like prayer, like delving into the scriptures. What I did not appreciate at that time, but appreciate more, is the importance of fellowship and community and literally being in the presence of people who bear witness and who speak to you. This conversation right now, right? We're in the middle of this global pandemic. People are being hospitalized, who are being infected, literally dying. And we're in this conversation in this moment, holding one together. So that is the practice that really restores me most.
Imam, let me ask you that question,
Wait,
Imam.
Bruce, I have to say, this is a guy who's talking about human frailty who I watched walk from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C., and he wouldn't let anybody else take any step. He walked the whole way. If he missed something because of a meeting, he got up early in the morning and made up the steps. So, oh my God, if that's human frailty, this guy is driven by something beyond belief. Sorry.
Well, this is a fitting time. We just watched the coffin of John Lewis, an American saint he's been called in recent days, make that journey across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and then up the Black Lives Matter Plaza in front of the church that Bishop Budde has done so much to defend the honor of, and then become the first lawmaker to lie in state. But let me turn to you, Imam, and ask you this a question that grows out of that, which is that if this is a time that we're all going through a life quake, then that includes you and that includes other leaders. Are you allowed in your community to be vulnerable, or do you have to be Mr. Fix-It and Mr. Comforter, and that you are not allowed to be going through a transition and to be feeling that pain and lack of confidence yourself?
I'm very grateful, actually, to my community. They're very understanding. The Imam in America at this time, since 9/11 especially, they become everything. The PR, the counselor, the one who presides over the funeral, over the wedding, like a Superman. But I would like to say that one of the things I value the most, make me be able to do this work, is my family. I cannot tell you the amount of support and comfort I get from my family. That is my comfort zone, where I become myself, and they were really re-energized, and the support for me to do more of this work for my community. Therefore, it is very humbling when a person come home and you're a dad now, you are a husband, and then you get all of this love and support and so forth, and you just went through maybe a very difficult counseling. You counsel somebody who's on the deathbed, or you counsel a couple or a person who went through domestic violence, and then you come with all of these things heavy on your shoulders and so forth, and you come home and you get all the support. At this time, COVID-19, I do a lot of work from home. Therefore, I go to my office, go through a lot of things in this Zooming thing, and then go back upstairs to my family, where there's a love and my daughter is just start laughing with me and joking with me. That's how I get my energy, from my family.
Not from this Zooming thing. Can you imagine? Okay, Johari, I want to turn to you and ask you, do you have a question? Because we just had answers from Reverend Brooks and the Imam. You have a question for the bishop and the rabbi?
I do have a question, and it relates to some of the issues that were presented earlier, and are really Bruce Feiler, not Bruce Lustig, because I have like a Bruce relationship going on. When we look at the confluence of the global pandemic, why is it now that people around the world think that Black Lives matters? Black lives seem to be irrelevant until this pandemic. That the litany of people who have been victimized didn't seem to matter much until this particular crisis. And so I'd like to ask our leaders what it is that you think is going on that makes people have this feeling now, whether they're in Tokyo or Toronto. What is it? And if there is something to it, how can we hold on to that sense after this pandemic has passed?
So let's turn first to Bishop Budde, and I've alluded to this a couple of times. For those of you who don't know, Bishop Budde is you can help me with the jurisdiction, but in your community includes St. John's Church, which is the one across from the White House on the other side of Lafayette Square, that presidents for generations have gone to pray. And that night, that now infamous night that clearly backfired on the president when they cleared the protesters with sometimes aggressive, violent means, and he stood in front of the church with that Bible. You were on CNN within the hour. I personally was watching you, defending this, and so you found yourself thrust in the middle of this, whether you had sought it out or not. So let's answer this thing that we've talked about a couple of times. What is the connection between the political lifequake that we're in, the pandemic lifequake we're in, that has led so many people who might otherwise done to take voluntary action, put their own lives at risk, and say, now I'm going to go into battle in a voluntary collective lifequake, at least in the language of my book?
Thank you for the question. I would say, first of all, there is a tremendous mystery to all of that. So to speak definitively of it is perhaps folly. But I am a student of social change. And one of the bedrock theories of social change is that it takes time for ideas that some people carry on our behalf at great cost to themselves, with a modicum of isolation for decades, perhaps longer. It takes a certain series of transitions that need to happen, that need to happen for it to become a social movement, for ideas that were once the purview of a few to become something that is more socially accepted by the center of a community, so that the momentum shifts in a new direction. And so when I pray about this, and when I watch what's happening, and I even take internal stock of what's happening in my own life, I liken the killing of George Floyd perhaps to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as what we've been talking about before, to Bloody Sunday. That there was a lot building up until that moment. There was a lot of really hard organizing and sacrificial action, and a lot of things that the majority of the country really on a observing level wasn't paying attention to. But then when the cameras were on the bridge and the country saw children being attacked by dogs and John Lewis being carried off and beaten, that something, like as Malcolm Gladwell will say, it was a tipping point. And there were more people who were willing to take a risk to join the movement than there were people who were apathetic or opposed to it. And I wonder, I mean, it's just a question, I don't know if that's true, but I wonder if the buildup of horrific events that led to our witnessing the murder of George Floyd in that horrific, endless 8.5 minutes, if it wasn't something that tipped something that had been building for some time, thanks to the tireless efforts of people who have been organizing and protesting and working to that moment. That's my prayer. And then I think it's the responsibility to say, okay, if that's true, then we have to keep on building that momentum and not allowing ourselves to rest there, but to say we're blessed. In spiritual traditions, we would say it's an opportune moment. It's a God thing. There's a kairos, opportune time that's happening, but it's also sociological theory that enough of us now are awake that we're willing to move collectively in a way that those who've been carrying that torch for us for so long have been doing by themselves.
That gives me a chance to kind of make a point, and then I'm going to ask a final question, and we're going to let everyone go into their evening. And the point I want to make is that when I was analyzing these conversations, when I was trying to figure out how we respond to personal change, as you were just speaking so eloquently about societal change, I strove quite hard to come up with terms that are value neutral. The reason I use the word disruptor is because the disruptor doesn't imply positive or negative. It is a neutral term. And the same with lifequake. And I think that this is an occasion to remind that some of these lifequakes are negative, but many of them are positive also. Having identical twins, as I did, was a life quake. Getting married, becoming an empty nester. These are things, this time of year, many people will be saying goodbye to children, or should be saying goodbye to the children if they were going to school. These are life quakes, but they are positive. And so with that in mind, I want to ask everybody, if you just can wrap up I'll give each of you a minute. If you could speak to the people out there going through personal life quakes now, and if you could give them a sense that maybe something constructive could come out of this time of pain. 150,000 dead, 50 million people have lost jobs. 4 million Americans have had this disease, and we don't know the consequences. And every day we see shutdowns and kids forced home from school, and plans changed, weddings, bar mitzvahs, funerals, brises, whatever in every denomination. So people are scared and they're hurting. So if you could, each of you in a minute of a final remark, say something hopeful that you have that might come out. We can't change the fact that it's going to change, that we're in a life quake, but perhaps we can change the life transition that comes out of it. So give us a closing thought, and let me start with you, Reverend Brooks.
Sure. But I think we're in a moment in which the societal is personal. And what I mean by that is, as the bishop lifted up, the George Floyd protests are personal. And the reason I know that is because in the midst of COVID-19, there's a heightened sense of the fragility of life. And so watching that videotape, you're drawn into literally the fragility of life in terms of violence. But I would also note that there's a durability of faith, right? We're in the midst of this moment where we've seen a kind of global seismic life quake being experienced in deeply personal and intimate ways. But what we know as people of faith is that our life quakes may leave us uncertain and shaken, but we're often brought literally closer to God in ways that are intimate and powerful and life-changing. Because literally the circumstantial uncertainty leads to a spiritual maturity and often, if not a spiritual certainty, then being more certain in terms of those things which are true. And so if there's a negative good that comes out of this, Bruce, when you mentioned our children going off to school, let us know this. Many of us have spent more time with our children as a consequence of COVID-19. Yeah. Blessed by being forced to be together and forced to be together as families. We're forced to be together as people of God. And while we may be Zooming with one another, some of us are Zooming more than we previously worshiped. Because so many things are so uncertain literally around us. So, this societal, circumstantial, personal, spiritual life quake, may well be a blessing.
Imam, thank you very much, Reverend Brooks. Imam, a final thought. Can any good come out of this awful moment that we're in?
I think we discover our common humanity, COVID-19, because the virus have not discriminated against any nationality that I know of now. We are one human being, that's for sure. The second thing that I really learned from this humility, that the most powerful and the less powerful, all of them get impacted almost, across the world. But also, we discovered that the emperor was no clothes, that there's so many vulnerable people in this world that we've been neglecting. Now we have to take care of, whether that Black Lives Matters, whether that is regarding the refugees, and compassion. It is what I'm looking for coming years.
Bishop Budde, a final thought. Thank you very much, Imam.
I think I'll come at it from a different angle. I think we are all in a master class of grief, and that there is it's too soon to speak definitively about the good that will come, at least for those who have been so devastated by the loss. But so I feel that this is a time of deep solidarity, as you were saying, Imam, and an opportunity for us to do what human beings do in times of grief, which is to listen to one another, to be present, to offer solace, consolation, and that the story of how we came through this time will be told later, and that we have the opportunity now to live in such a way that when we tell the story of how we lived through it, or when others tell our story, that we can say that we did our best to be present to the magnitude of suffering that was thrust upon so many at this time.
Bruce, I'm going to give you a last word, but before I do, I'm going to give my last word. I'm going to thank you, Rabbi Lustig, and everybody, Bishop, Reverend, Imam. I mean, I'm extremely emotional at this moment and grateful that this journey I went on has brought all of you together, and that we've heard this wisdom and vulnerability and compassion and vision from the people gathered here. It's incredibly gratifying to me. It can be a lonely journey to go on a journey of this nature, and that this has brought this assemblage. And building, Bishop Budde, on what you just said, I read a book about grief while I was working on this story, and I'll end with that thought. And the most powerful thing that I learned about grief from talking to people who lost children and lost loved ones, grieved their own loss of limbs in war, the loss of parents, loss of dignity, loss of everything. I learned a couple of things, and I learned that in grief, we slow down. In grief, we slow down, and that is valuable because it forces us to be more careful about the small and particular and individual things that we have to do. So insofar as we all are grieving this moment, the 150,000 families that lost loved ones, but also our children and our parents who can't see our children, each of the individual things that we might have enjoyed in the course of a day, a week, a month, a year that we've lost, we all are grieving in some way, and that is making us slow down. And in the slowing, as somebody who was on crutches for 2 years, my favorite expression from when I had cancer and I was on my femur, and I was on crutches for 2 years, was I learned about a certain kind of gentleman called a flaneur in Paris 200 years ago. And to show that they were men of leisure, men of privilege in the modern vernacular, they used to take turtles for a walk to show that they didn't have anywhere to go. And I love that. And my favorite signature phrase of that period was take a walk with a turtle and behold the world in pause. And we are in a pause now. And I hope that allows us to reconnect with others, to listen to others, to grieve a little, and ultimately to find a new tribe and a new community that we can go forward into whatever the new normal will be together. And I hope in a small way that this gathering will have given people that sense of community. And I'm honored that all of you came, and I'm grateful that so many of us have had a chance to listen to you. And Bruce, since this was your idea, I'll thank you on behalf of the rest of us, and we'll give you the last word.
Well, I want to take a moment, just thank you. I'm also going to share one thing that I think comes out of both. I told you this is a beautiful book, and I want to thank you for the continual opportunity that you give. As a Jew, I've always believed that one of the things that I love most about my Judaism is that there is no belief that doesn't have a corollary action. And so I also believe that happens with our learning as well. And what I hope that we all understand out of this is what I think religion does for us, is it makes us realize that we are not alone. And in these moments, we aren't alone, we have each other. I'm so gifted because I feel blessed because I gathered people here on this call who are some of the most incredible social activists and pastors and leaders, but they're also my friends. They're the people that lift me up. So I just want to remind people that there are no right decisions. There are only decisions we make right. There are opportunities that we have to remember that we are not powerless, but that we are empowered, and that we can have the opportunity to face these life transitions at any age with a sense of being empowered that we have the ability to fashion our own destiny and to write our own narrative. Bruce, you have written so many things, from being a clown to being a dad who feared the loss of his future with his children, to walking the Bible in the footsteps of the great three religions of Abraham, our common father, and you've given us a great gift. I encourage people to read this, but more important, to do what Bruce is asking us, to navigate these life transitions in a way that'll bring better tomorrow to our children, to each of us. So Bruce Feiler, we thank you. I put into the chat box, you will see that there is the website. I also want to tell you that something, and I do this out of for benefit and not for Bruce's sake, but for the good it does. In his conversations with his father, he realized the power of narrative. And he has on his website something that I've given to a number of people, somebody whose wife is facing Parkinson's disease, another person whose husband is facing dementia at a rapid pace. And this is the opportunity that he gives us to participate in this narrative where he sends these questions and puts together these life stories. We are thankful for your life story. I want to wish everybody a better tomorrow. And to Cornell Brooks, we want to thank you for all the incredible work that you do and for making the time. You have reminded us, and I learned so much walking with you on the journey for justice. You never stop walking that journey. To Imam Magid, who is my brother and who hugs the world every day, we want to thank you. And to Bishop Budde, who is as thoughtful and as spiritual as they come, but who is a leader who always reminds us that there's a side of God that we need to turn to, and that's the side of God that turns us to others. And also to Imam Jahari, who joined us here tonight, who is my teacher and who continues to bring justice to the world and ask the difficult questions. Bruce, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, give yourself a gift, read this book, and Bruce, keep writing, keep doing, and keep giving us these opportunities. Good night to one and all.